Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. Tunisian president sacks 57 judges, accusing them of corruption and of protecting terrorists. Well, AU chairman Macky Sall said to be on his way to Russia to discuss the food crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. Plus, the UN Special Envoy to the DRC says a strong military response will be needed to end the M23 insurgency. Hello, welcome to the program. Today, I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. We begin in Tunisia, where President Kais Saied has sacked 57 judges, accusing them of corruption and protecting terrorists. He made the announcement on television during his address. He told Tunisians he had given the judiciary multiple opportunities and warnings to purify itself. Among those sacked is Youssef Bouzaka, the former head of the Supreme Judicial Council, which the president dissolved in February. The council had acted as the main guarantor of judicial independence since Tunisia's 2011 revolution, and the move fueled accusations that the president was interfering in the judicial process. He's already dismissed Tunisia's elected parliament and set aside the constitution. Mr. Saied has promised a referendum on a new constitution next month. He's been ruling by decree ever since, claiming he needed to take action to save Tunisia from crisis. Initially, his moves appeared to win public support after years of economic stagnation, political paralysis and corruption. But public anger is growing amid high inflation and unemployment, declining public services. However, opposition parties in the main trade union umbrella are boycotting the move. To the impact of the war in Ukraine on food imports, especially a looming food crisis here in Africa, head of the African Union and Senegal's President Macky Sall is said to be on his way to Russia, where he will be discussing the impending food security caused by the war in Ukraine. That visit was organized after an invitation by the Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom he will be meeting on Friday. President Sall's office says the visit is aimed at freeing up stocks of cereals and fertilizers that are currently blocked in Ukrainian ports. African countries have been particularly affected by the price increases caused by the war. The African Union is also scheduled to receive a video address from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, although no date has been set. Now, both Ukraine and Russia are major suppliers of wheat and other cereals to Africa, while Russia is a key producer of fertilizer. Earlier in the week, President Sall made an appeal to European Union leaders to help ease the crisis on key commodities. He says their decision to expel Russian banks from the SWIFT financial messaging system could hurt food supplies to the continent. We're staying with the issue. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has reiterated the Russia-Ukraine conflict could lead to a global food crisis, which will hit developing countries the hardest. He met with Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson to discuss the security situation in Europe, recovery from the pandemic, and the green transition on the day. Speaking at a press conference after, Guterres said the food crisis cannot be resolved effectively unless Russia's manure and food production and Ukraine's food production can reach world markets again. Mr. Guterres also called for swift decisions to counter the food crisis that could arise from the conflict, putting developing countries most at risk. During his previous visit to Senegal, Mr. Guterres noted the Ukraine crisis can have a dramatic effect on the economies of developing countries and is aggravating a triple food, energy and financial crisis across Africa.
Guterres to Stockholm.
A senior United Nations official says the Russia-Ukraine conflict will put at least 13 to 15 million people in the world at risk of hunger by the end of this year. The director of the Moscow office of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, Oleg Kobyakov, says Russia and Ukraine are the world's largest and fifth largest wheat producers. Respectively, they also export. Together, they provide 19% of the world's barley supply, 14% of wheat, and 4% of maize, making up more than 1/3 of global cereal exports. In Ukraine, which is known as the breadbasket of Europe, the conflict has left unharvested wheat that was planted months ago, while maize and sunflowers sown when the conflict broke out were left unfertilized. It is estimated that Ukraine's grain production may fall by more than 50% in the current season. Live joining me now, Executive Director, Chief Executive, Kari Assets Limited, John Chukwu. He joins me from Owerri, the Imo State capital. Johnson Chukwu, thank you for joining me on the program. Now, a month into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were fears a food crisis was already, up in the horizon. If we're still talking about it today, how soon does the impact then begin to hit hardest?
Thank you, Amarachi, for having me. I think the impact's already hitting hard. When you talk of hardest, one cannot say exactly when the worst case scenario will manifest. But as it stands today, Africa has always been vulnerable when it comes to food security. And now we've seen a significant increase in food prices, basic food prices. As you know, because of the income level in Africa, a large percentage of household consumption or expenditure goes into food. So when you see an increase of like 25% in the price of wheat, and similar products, corn, sunflower oil, and you are going to see a situation where many households in Africa will no longer be able to afford 3 square meals in a day. We already, if you look at Nigeria, for instance, the World Poverty Clock says that over more than 80 million Nigerians are living in abject poverty. So that will worsen further because as the price of these basic food items increase, you find that a lot more Nigerians will not be able to afford those food items. That applies to almost all African countries. So because of the low income level in Africa, and now that we're dealing with a war situation that has led to a material increase in food prices, as well as material increase in energy costs, and then African households can barely meet the basic food needs of their families.
Well, that already had been predicted, of course, and then Africa is so dependent on these imports, aren't they? We're producing here, but not enough to meet the populations, and many of the populations will suffer just because Ukraine has been blocked from exporting grain. How come there's no outcry then from these populations about the drop in imports?
Because of the level of awareness, the level of knowledge, or particularly awareness in among the African population. Many of them may not know where the problem is coming from. What they know is that the price of basic food items have increased, the price of bread, which is a major staple in most African household tables, have increased, the price of major energy sources have increased. So for most Africans, they think, some of them may actually think it's a domestic issue. Many of them are not aware that they are to a large extent dependent on food production coming from Ukraine and Russia. As you have mentioned earlier, the two countries account for about 1/3 of wheat production globally. Ukraine alone accounts for about 50% of sunflower oil production, about 10% of global grain production, and about 13% of corn production worldwide. So these are going to have direct impact with the inability to export due to the blockade of Black Sea ports, as well as difficulties in exporting from the western boundaries of Ukraine. Then, to worsen matters, most African countries import their fertilizer. And fertilizer, Russia is a major fertilizer exporter in the world. So with the war going on now, most countries may not be able to get the fertilizer to plant early. So you're going to see a worsening situation by the time you get to the harvest season. Because many farmers are unable to plant.
Yeah, and some of Ukraine's grain has already been destroyed. We saw some of them, in videos past. Those grains have been harvested and put into barns, some of them being targeted by Russian missiles. How quickly then can countries even like Nigeria meet up the differences being caused by this change in the situation?
Unfortunately for us, we do not have the structures to quickly build up our production capabilities. In the first place, you have to consider what is the yield on average cultivated on per square meter or per hectare of cultivated land in Nigeria, whether you are growing grains or other staple food items. In terms of yield, we don't have very prolific yield when we talk of cultivated land in Nigeria. That's one. Then our major issues, structural issues like Land Use Act, peasant lands, when you have few mechanized agricultural activities that can actually ratchet up production. You still have to deal with the land, ownership of land. And then you are now, what matters, we also have internal issues of insecurity across the major food belts of the country. So you have insecurity in the northeast, northwest, and now north central. And it's actually coming down to even the southern part of the country. So you have even internal displacement of farmers, those who are even involved in peasant farming. So in the case of Nigeria, it's going to be a tough call for us to be able to produce, to compensate for the shortfall in supply, or to reduce the pressure, the price pressure we're going through by absorbing the increase in the price of imported food items.
President Macky Sall is on his way to Russia. How do you predict the conversation will go with him, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, tomorrow when they both meet?
No, I'm not interested. I'm quite optimistic. You know why? Russia is looking for a global friendship, given that the Western countries, the U.S., are all up in arms against Russia. So they will likely want to woo African countries. I think President Macky Sall would be successful in that engagement with the Russian president because Russia would not want to antagonize the entire world. So I believe it's going to get a favorable response, and hopefully Russia will open up channels for export of these grains to Africa, probably open up some aspect of the Black Sea seaport and allow vessels to take off and come to Africa. Because anything to the contrary will mean that Russia wants to be fully isolated by every other country in the world.
Johnson Chukwu, thank you so much for speaking with us and helping us to understand the situation as it unfolds.
My pleasure.
A flight safety team from the U.S. Air Forces in Europe, Air Forces Africa, has traveled to Abuja, the Nigerian capital, to conduct a 5-day military exchange program to enhance the Nigerian Air Force's operational safety. A safety team visited the NAF Institute of Safety in Ipetu-Ijesha, which was the first ever U.S. Air Force visit there. NAFIS is a formal school for Nigerian Air Force officers that run unit safety programs and is responsible for maintaining a culture of safety throughout the service. After departing NAFIS, the team met with leadership and safety officers from a Nigerian Air Force transportation squadron to discuss the appropriate organizational structure of safety reporting procedures, and the role of formal safety schools. The U.S. has collaborated with the Nigerian Air Force through US AFE and AFAF on several safety-related programs. In August 2021, the team visited the 307 Executive Airlift Group to assess the safety program and make recommendations. Shortly after, it also taught a 2-week formal safety course for 24 Nigerian Air Force officers. In return, the group sent 2 participants of the safety course to the United States to attend U.S. Air Force International Safety Program Officers Course at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. We have more coming up after the break on Network Africa Plus. Well, it is the Queen's Jubilee, of course, and hundreds out there to celebrate as she appears on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. Stay with us. Welcome back to Network Africa. A Senegalese refugee, his 3 wives, children and extended family are among more than 690 people across into the Gambia after the Senegalese military launched an operation on March 13 against rebels in Casaman's fighting for independence. Amid continuous fightings, they're now hosted by Gambians while waiting to return home.
3 bullets whistled past Senegalese villager Modou Badji and his family as they ran through a cashew forest in the middle of the night to reach neighboring Gambia, pushed to abandon their fields by a flare-up in fighting between soldiers and separatists in Senegal's southern Casamance region.
We fled because of the war. I regularly heard gunshots. it was the military and the rebels who were fighting. It's true that we couldn't see them, but we could hear the shooting. It wasn't safe to stay in that environment.
Badji, his 3 wives, children and extended family, among more than 690 people that crossed into Gambia after the Senegalese military launched an operation on March 13th against rebels in Casamance fighting for independence. Formed in 1982, the separatist movement have been largely dormant since a ceasefire in 2014, but continues to launch occasional attacks, prompting military interventions. The latest clash displaced over 6,000 villagers in both Senegal and Gambia, where households have been hosting refugees, placing pressure on the tiny West African nation of around 2 million people. Badji's dozen relatives moved in with a family of around 15. Women and children sleep together under the corrugated iron roof of the cement home on mattresses laid out across the floor.
At home, everyone had their own room, and you could sleep peacefully inside. Now, look at us. We're sleeping on the floor. The people who took us in are sleeping with us. They don't have any privacy because of us. The Gambian government helped us by building the tents you can see over there, but it is very hot inside.
The men stay in green tarpaulin tents donated by the Gambian Red Cross. Badji's host Suleiman Sonko said humanitarian assistance has been slow and sparse.
Many children have stopped going to school since they fled their village. Before the exam, they had to flee because of the military. It hurts me. They can't even go and get cashew nuts to sell and eat, and that is because of the military.
This situation worries Abdullahi Fai, Director of Programs and Operations at the Gambian Red Cross Society.
We don't actually know what is the situation, in the Casamance region. The fighting can erupt at any time. We don't know. So it means still now people have to be very much careful, in those areas. But of course, getting security updates, and the security providing the necessary support to the population in this area so that they are, in a safe zone at all times.
For now, nobody knows when the fighting will end and the displaced population able to return home.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the UN Secretary General's special representative and the DRC has strongly advised that a strong military response is needed to end the M23 insurgency once and for all. Bintou Keita praised the UN forces and the National Army for restoring calm in Nyiragongo and Rushuru areas of North Kivu province after 2 weeks of clashes with the rebels. She made the comment in the North Kivu province capital Goma on Wednesday, where she added that the threat from the rebels was possible with a strong military response to M23 aggression, a political response via regional mechanisms and the government's program of disarmament and reintegration of rebel groups. The M23 has called for the government to implement the Nairobi Peace Accords of 2013, but the government now regards them as terrorists and has ruled out new talks with them. Asylum seekers in the UK are not happy about being deported to Rwanda under a controversial new scheme. Many have been speaking about the distress they're facing after being served notices. Several of them, including people from Egypt, Syria and Sudan, say they have gone on hunger strike as they see deportation as worse than death. The British government says the planned deportations, which cannot be appealed against, are an attempt to overhaul what it calls a broken asylum system. It says it's taken every step to prevent self-harm or suicide at immigration removal centers. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says there's no basis for the claims of criminal conduct relating to an alleged cover-up of a burglary that at one of his property back in 2020. President Ramaphosa was responding to accusation by the country's former spy chief, Arthur Fraser, of kidnapping and bribery in a case he has registered with the police. Fraser says a case related to the alleged attempted theft of at least $4 million in 2020 at a farm in Limpopo province and the alleged efforts to conceal what happened. He ran the country's state security agency between 2016 and 2018 and has said he handed photographs, bank account details and video footage over to the police. President Ramaphosa says there was a robbery at the farm in which proceeds from the sale of game were stolen. A statement from his office says the president reported the incident to the police's President Protection Unit and stands ready to cooperate with any law enforcement investigation on the matters. Hundreds of thousands of Britons are witnessing, or today witnessed the colour, the Trooping the Colour, marking the Queen's Jubilee celebration starting today. The Queen herself appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. We're looking at videos of the royal family, all senior working roles at least, with the Queen on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. There they are, acknowledging the crowd, which is rather ecstatic at seeing them. And much earlier today, the Queen appeared on the balcony with her cousin, the Duke of Kent, to inspect parading troops, much to the delight of the crowd.
The main highlight of the Jubilee celebration starting today, the Queen's appearance at the balcony of Buckingham Palace, accompanied by her cousin, the Duke of Kent, who salutes. She's wearing an outfit described as dusky dove blue as they inspect parading troops. Before her appearance, other royals had made their way out in true royal fashion through Queen Victoria Memorial in front of Buckingham Palace, down the Mall, as hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets to watch. First was Prince Charles and Prince William on horseback, then Princess Anne, also on horseback, before the carriages carrying Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, in horse-drawn carriage, with her children Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis waving to the crowd. The Queen's Birthday Parade, also known as Trooping the Colour, has more than 1,200 soldiers taking part, along with military bands. It's been held for more than 260 years. It comes on the first of 4 days of celebrations in Britain to mark Queen Elizabeth II's 7 decades on the throne. The Queen has attended every such parade except one since 1955. With scaled-down ceremonies taking place in the last 2 years because of the coronavirus restrictions. Due to her mobility issues, for the first time, she takes the salute from soldiers and officers from the balcony of Buckingham Palace.
Well, we're celebrating here as well. Thanks for watching Network Africa. I'm Amarachi Ubani.